For our top international story this hour, we are monitoring reaction to President Trump's recent announcement that the U.S. will soon withdraw from the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, an agreement signed by President Ronald Reagan and Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev in 1987. President Trump has found support for the U.S. pullout in the U.K., with British Defense Secretary Gavin Williamson declaring London stands, quote, absolutely resolute alongside Washington. Germany, however, struck an antagonistic tone, with a government spokesperson saying Berlin regrets the U.S. decision.
The U.S. government has informed us about the decision of the U.S. president that the U.S. would withdraw from this treaty. We regret the withdrawal announced by the U.S. We see this treaty as a very important instrument of the arms control and an element that serves also the European interests, therefore also the German interests. The treaty obliges the USA and Russia to abolish and destroy medium-range missiles with a range between 310 to 3,100 miles. And since 1987, it has been contributing to Europe's security.
Trump announced the U.S. withdrawal ahead of National Security Advisor John Bolton's trip to Moscow for meetings with Russian President Vladimir Putin and other officials. Speaking at the White House on Monday, Trump said the U.S. withdrawal can be seen as a threat to, quote, whoever you want, but seemed to have two nations especially on his mind.
Until people come to their senses, Russia has not adhered to the agreement. This should have been done years ago. Until people come to their senses, we have more money than anybody else by far. We'll build it up. Until they come to their senses. When they do, then we'll all be smart and we'll all stop. And by the way, not only stop, we'll reduce, which I would love to do. But right now, they have not adhered to the agreement.
You're saying
It's a threat to whoever you want, and it includes China, and it includes Russia.
Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin charged the U.S. with destroying the INF Treaty, claiming the U.S. only wants to develop weapons banned under the agreement for the purpose of blackmail.
The United States is in fact on the path to destroying the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. They are continuously looking for violations on our part, but in fact they do it themselves systematically. As I've already mentioned, we have registered further attempts to break strategic parity by deploying the Global Missile Defense System, as well as non-nuclear strike systems that can be compared to nuclear weapons, whose strike capabilities are almost as precise as those of nuclear weapons. Why do they need such weapons? I believe there's only one reason: for blackmail.
Finally, a Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson responded by describing Trump's comments as unreasonable and echoed Putin in her characterization of U.S. actions.
The Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty is a treaty signed by the United States and the former Soviet Union. It is a bilateral treaty. It is totally unreasonable to make an issue out of China on withdrawing from the treaty. China always upholds a national defense policy that is defensive in nature and firmly safeguards its legitimate security interest. We will by no means accept any kind of blackmail. We would like to urge the U.S. not to move against the trend and think twice before taking any actions.
With global security in question, I spoke earlier with Mike Preisner. He's a U.S. Army veteran and co-host of the Eyes Left podcast. A poll conducted this month found that 46% of U.S. troops believe the U.S. will be drawn into a new war within the next year. Shockingly, that's up from 5% just 1 year ago, so quite the drastic increase. What policies are behind those numbers?
Well, you know, it's a very interesting survey. It's really drastic, jaw-dropping rise in the, concern that a new war is going to break out within the year among rank-and-file soldiers. It's not just that they believe a new war is going to break out, but they fear a new war is going to break out. I think that reflects that they don't really trust the leadership, both getting us into a war and what's going to happen in the war. But I think it's important to look at that really jarring, skyrocketing concerns among service members, because it gives us a little indication about what's going on behind the scenes. What the people in the military know quite a lot sooner than the general public does about what types of wars are brewing and so forth. And so if the top echelons of the command, if the White House and its top Pentagon generals are considering new wars with China, with Russia, with Korea, with Venezuela, wherever else, that, of course, goes down the line in terms of new training regiments, new equipment being issued, all types of things. And so there might be a growing fear among rank-and-file soldiers because there are indications going on within the military that they are gearing up for something. And I think that, the fact that they fear a new war, not just believe a new war is coming, is probably based on the experience of the past 15 years. Anyone who has in the military who has any memory of what's gone on in the past 15 years, it's just real, military defeat for the U.S. at the hands of whoever they're going to fight and occupy. And when that defeat is quite apparent, the commanders, these so-called leaders, just are sending more and more soldiers to die for absolutely no reason. And so I think the fears are quite justified. Anyone in the military should be worried about Trump starting a new war and should be, prepared to resist it as well.
The fear is that Russia or China would be the targets of this new war. But we know that, for example, even if Venezuela was the target, Russia or China might be pressured to get involved the same way we saw Russia intervene in Syria. How would that kind of escalation look when compared with something like the war in Iraq, a conflict which you experienced firsthand?
Yeah, well, that survey where troops fear a new war, I mean, Russia and China were at the tops of their concerns of a new war breaking out with them. Of course, the Trump administration very much signaling, and of course, all the people in his cabinet, want this kind of, insane war with these major powers. But look, I mean, the Iraq War, for the most of the Iraq War, Iraq had no army. I mean, it was fighting a real grassroots, national uprising and insurgency that wasn't a force-on-force military confrontation. Afghanistan, I mean, the U.S. clearly defeated in Afghanistan. There's people in Afghanistan using rifles from the year 1912. And so when you're looking at these two really major defeats, that pales in comparison to anything that would happen with Russia and China. I mean, the U.S. military was reeling and is still reeling today from around 5,000 casualties, 6,000 casualties in Iraq and Afghanistan. Really devastated by the number of injuries, traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress disorder. I mean, it devastated the military community and military families and made morale in the military completely plummet. I mean, that is nothing compared to the devastation that would happen and the loss of life on all sides if there was some kind of major war with countries that have been doing nothing but preparing to fight the United States for many, many decades. And so I think that's why there's a lot of justified fear. At the same time, that fear is rising of a new war among the military. Trump's approval rating is dropping within the military, and his disapproval rating is on the rise. And so I think that there's an acknowledgement that a new war wouldn't be like these wars in the past 2 decades, where there was a very low amount of loss of life on the U.S. side. But I think there's a recognition that these would be conflicts with many, many thousands of U.S. casualties right off the bat. And so I feel like troops today are questioning, do they want to be cannon fodder in another war for the rich?
Finally, Trump says that the U.S. needs to build its nuclear stockpile for the sake of national security. Yet we know the U.S. is the only country which has ever used a nuclear weapon, and it has enough nuclear weapons to destroy the world many times over. So as a veteran, how would you go about ensuring the national security of the United States?
Well, probably starting by closing down its bases, its hated occupations all over the world, stopping threatening countries, intervening in their elections, intervening in the local politics, determining their destiny. So I think maybe giving the people of the world the right to live and stand on their own without U.S. interference is probably the first way to protect national security. But this issue of nuclear weapons and the fact that the U.S. has the ability to destroy the world many times over with its nuclear arsenal, I mean, I think there's a misconception that it's going to take 100 nuclear weapons to do something like that, or we have 10,000, 15,000 nuclear weapons, and if we get 20,000 nuclear weapons, the world is in peril. I mean, the bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki are nothing compared to the nuclear weapons that the U.S. possesses today. I mean, there are scientists who believe that it won't take 100 nuclear strikes or 1,000 nuclear strikes to imperil life on Earth, but a single nuclear strike could cause the elimination of our species, could cause kind of an irreversible domino effect with the atmosphere and with the climate. And so we're talking about, to think that we could protect American lives with a nuclear arsenal that in a single day could trigger a reaction that ends all life on Earth. I mean, I think it's I don't think it's an overstatement to say these are kind of apocalyptic ideas by someone who we should have no confidence in to make the decision to pull a trigger or push a button. I mean, I think these are extremely dire times, and that people in the military, as we showed from these surveys, are very rightfully worried about what's happening and should refuse to take part in it.
And the rest of the world certainly is concerned with these developments from the United States, saying that it makes even our allies in Europe and in other parts of the world less safe. Mike Preisner, host of the Eyes Left podcast. He's a U.S. Army veteran. Thanks so much.
Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out our channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. We have tons of content for you just like this. For more of RT America's one-of-a-kind news and analysis, be sure to subscribe and never stop questioning more.